The real reason money makes you anxious has almost nothing to do with money. The night my 9-year-old asked me how much we had, I did the one thing my own mother would have found unthinkable. I told him, a real number, an honest one, and I watched his small face try to hold it. In the house I grew up in, money was more forbidden than death. You never asked what your father earned. You never said out loud that the family was worried, even in the years I now know we were. And standing in that kitchen, watching my son absorb a number that meant nothing to him and everything to me, I finally understood the thing I most want to give you tonight. The panic so many of us feel around money was never installed by money. It was installed by silence. If you've ever frozen when a child asked what something cost or felt that hot flush of not knowing whether to lie, deflect, or tell the truth, then you already understand what this video is really about, and it isn't money at all. Let me say clearly what this is and what it isn't, because I don't want to waste the trust you gave me by clicking. This is not a video about teaching your kid to budget with 3 glass jars labeled spend, save, and give. Those jars are fine, they are also not the point, and I think somewhere inside you already know they're not the point, or a piggy bank would have fixed something by now. What I want to talk about is the quiet emotional education that happens around money, whether we plan it or not, the thing a child absorbs from the temperature of the room when the bills come, from the sentence that gets cut off when they walk in, from the particular silence that money creates in most homes. Because that silence teaches. It teaches more powerfully than any lesson we sit down to deliver. And most of us are transmitting a whole inheritance we never meant to pass on, in a language we don't even realize we're speaking. I come at this from a specific place, and I'll be honest about its edges. I grew up in a Chinese household where money was governed by a set of rules so consistent they felt like physics. And I want to be clear from the start that I'm describing my family and my generation, not a billion people who are as different from each other as any group on earth. In my house, money was private. Money was serious. Money was tied so tightly to a family's face, its dignity in the eyes of others, that to speak of it carelessly was to risk something close to shame. There is real wisdom buried in that, and I'll get to it, because the discretion I was raised with protects something the modern world has almost entirely lost. But there was a cost to it too, a cost I carried into adulthood as a low, permanent hum of anxiety that I could not trace to any single event, because it wasn't an event, it was an atmosphere, and the older I get, the more I meet people from every culture and background who breathe that same atmosphere in their own childhood homes, which tells me this isn't a Chinese story or a Western story. It's a human one wearing different clothes in different houses. So here's the question I want to actually sit inside with you for the next while. And it's a harder question than, how do I teach my kid about money? The real question is, what did money feel like in the house you grew up in? And what is it feeling like in the house your children are growing up in right now, tonight, whether or not you've ever said a word about it out loud? Because that feeling, not the facts, not the tips, is the thing they will carry. That feeling is the actual curriculum. And once you see that, you can't unsee it, and you start to parent the feeling instead of just managing the information. Think for a moment about how a young child first learns what money is before anyone formally teaches them anything. They don't learn it as an economic concept. They learn it as an emotional weather system. They learn it by watching a parent's shoulders at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes. They learn it from the sudden brightness in a mother's voice that doesn't match her eyes when a child asks for something in a store. They learn it from the fight that happens behind a bedroom door in tones low enough to hide the words, but never low enough to hide the fear. A child is a genius at reading emotional weather in a way that makes deep sense, because a child who can sense whether the adults around them are safe is a child better equipped to survive. They cannot yet understand a mortgage, but they can feel with perfect accuracy when the 2 adults they depend on most are afraid. And when that fear has no name, when it fills the house but is never spoken, the child does the thing children always do with unexplained fear. They assume it is somehow about them or caused by them or something they must silently help carry without ever being told what it is. That is the hidden engine of so much money anxiety in adults, and it's the proof of the promise I opened with, so I want you to really consider whether it's true of you. It is not usually that our parents taught us wrong ideas about money in words. It's that they transmitted a nameless dread about money in silence, and we absorbed the dread without ever getting the information that might have made it manageable. We inherited the fear without the context, the anxiety without the literacy. We grew up knowing money was dangerous, powerful, and not to be discussed, without ever learning what it actually was or how it actually worked. which is a little like being raised to fear the ocean by people who never taught you to swim and never even let you look at the water in daylight. The fear goes deep. The competence never develops. And then we become adults who earn perfectly reasonable incomes and still lie awake at 3 in the morning with a specific flavor of panic we could not explain to anyone because no one ever explained it to us. The money was never the problem. The silence was. If any of that landed, if you felt something tighten as I described that house, do one small thing before we go on because it matters more than it seems. Tell me in the comments what money sounded like in your childhood home, not what you were taught, what you heard, or more likely what you didn't, the shape of the silence. I read these, and on this channel, these threads become something rare. A room full of people realizing at once that the private ache they thought was theirs alone was a shared inheritance. And if this is already doing something to you, subscribe. Because in a few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what my mother's silence cost me, and then the 3 things I do with my own son instead. I make these for the person who suspects the exhaustion they carry is older than their own life and wants to understand it rather than just outrun it. Now let me take you back into the Chinese house I grew up in because I promised you its wisdom and not just its wound, and the wisdom is real. In my family, the silence around money was not simply repression, though it could harden into that. Underneath it was a genuine philosophy, one that the modern world would do well to remember even as it discards the parts that hurt. The first piece of it was this. Money was considered a private matter not because it was shameful in itself, but because displaying it, boasting of it, or complaining of it were all seen as failures of character. A person of real substance did not announce what they had because their worth was supposed to rest on something sturdier than their bank balance. And a person of real dignity did not parade what they lacked either, because turning your hardship into a performance for others was its own kind of weakness. There was a deep, almost architectural belief that a family's financial life was load-bearing and therefore not to be casually exposed to every passing eye. In a world now drowning in the opposite instinct, in the endless broadcast of what everyone earns and spends and owns and cannot afford, there is something I find quietly profound in the household I grew up in, which said in 100 wordless ways, "This is ours. We hold it with dignity and we do not use it to inflate ourselves above our neighbor or to beg for his pity." The second piece of the wisdom was the marriage of money and responsibility, which, in my childhood, were never separable. Money was not framed as a tool for personal happiness or self-expression, the way it so often is now. It was framed as a sacred trust that flowed through you toward the people you were responsible for. My grandparents saved not to feel secure in some private individual way, but because there were people above them and below them in the generations who might one day need to be caught. And it was unthinkable to be the one who could not catch them. Money was the physical form of your duty to your family across time. You were not really spending your own money when you spent, and you were not really saving your own money when you saved. You were a steward of something that belonged to the family line, passing through your hands on its way from the ancestors who sacrificed for you to the descendants you were sacrificing for. That reframe from money as personal possession to money as intergenerational responsibility is one of the most psychologically stabilizing ideas I have ever encountered, and I watched the modern world trade it away for a freedom that turned out to be much lonelier than anyone advertised. But here is where I have to turn the coin over, because this channel does not sell you a romanticized East to cure a broken West, and any video that does is lying to you. That same beautiful system of dignity and duty, when it curdled, produced specific and lasting harm, and I lived some of it. When money is bound that tightly to family honor, a financial struggle stops being a practical problem you can talk through and becomes a moral failure you must hide. A parent who loses a job is not simply unlucky, but ashamed, and that shame demands secrecy, and the secrecy fills the house with a fear the children can feel but cannot name. When money is a sacred duty to the whole lineage, a child's ordinary want for a toy, for a trip, for the thing their friend has, cannot be met with a simple, gentle no. It becomes freighted with the entire weight of the family's survival and sacrifice, so that a small desire produces a large guilt, and the child learns that to want anything is to threaten everyone. And when discretion hardens into total silence, you get exactly what I got, which is a child who grows into an adult fluent in the feeling of money and completely illiterate in its facts, carrying the anxiety of an entire lineage with none of the tools that anxiety was supposed to come packaged with. We're about halfway, and if you take only one idea with you tonight, let it be this one, because it's the hinge everything turns on. If the real source of money anxiety is silence and not money, then the cure is not to make money silent. That's what wounded us. And it is not to make money loud. That's the modern overcorrection that just trades old shame for new comparison and dread. The cure is to make money speakable. Calm, honest, unashamed speech about a normal part of life. Silence wounds, noise wounds differently, only speakable heals. If that just rearranged something for you, share this video with one person carrying money, fear they can't explain. Because in a moment, I'm going to give you the 3 exact things I do with my son to make money speakable, the practical version of everything I've said, and they'll want it too. That's the whole reason a channel like this can exist. So let me get concrete, because a philosophy you can't practice on a Tuesday night is just a decoration. What does it actually look like to make money speakable with a 9-year-old without dumping adult anxiety onto a child who is not equipped to hold it? The first principle is that you separate the facts of money from the fear of money, and you give the child the facts while you, the adult, privately carry the fear. This is the entire art of it. When my son asks what something costs, I tell him the true price in a calm voice, because the price is a fact, and facts are not frightening. What would have frightened me as a child was never the number. It was the tightening in my mother's jaw when the number came up, the sense that I had stepped on something dangerous by asking. So I have trained myself, and it did take training, to let the number be just a number. Bread costs this, the rent costs that, your school shoes cost this much, which is why we choose them to last. None of these facts carries a threat as long as I am not secretly transmitting one underneath them. Children can hold an enormous amount of truth. What they cannot hold is our unprocessed terror wearing the truth as a mask. The second principle is that you let a child experience the reality of limited resources in small, safe, concrete ways, rather than either hiding limits entirely or crushing them under limits too large to bear. A child who is never told no about anything does not grow up secure. They grow up anxious in a different direction, with no felt sense of edges in a world that is nothing but edges, and a quiet suspicion that the adults are hiding something because nothing they want is ever real enough to be refused. But a child who is handed the full adult weight of scarcity, who is made to feel that their winter coat is a crisis, learns that their own needs are a burden, and that lesson can take 40 years to unlearn if it is ever unlearned at all. The Chinese tradition I grew up in had a genuinely elegant middle path here, and it is one thing from my childhood I've kept almost entirely intact. A child was given a small, real domain of money to steward. Not a symbolic allowance to blow on candy, but a genuine, bounded responsibility, so that they could feel the actual texture of choosing, of trading off, of wanting 2 things and affording one, inside a container small enough that a wrong choice taught a lesson instead of causing a catastrophe. You learn the weight of money the way you learn the weight of anything, by lifting a small version of it, many times, until your hands are strong. The third principle, and the one I think matters most and is hardest to do, is that you narrate your own financial decisions out loud, calmly, so the child sees that money is a thing thinking adults navigate with judgment rather than a mysterious force that visits moods upon the household for reasons no one will explain. When I decide not to buy something, I try to say why in plain language without drama. We're not getting that today because we're choosing to spend on the trip this summer instead, and both can't happen, so we're picking the one we want more. Look at everything a child learns from one sentence like that. They learn that money is finite, which is true and not frightening when stated plainly. They learn that limits are the result of choices rather than helpless victimhood, that we pick, that we have agency. They learn that wanting something you don't get is survivable and ordinary, because there I am modeling exactly that, wanting and choosing and being completely fine. And most of all, they learn that the reasoning behind money is speakable, that it happens in the open, in words, in a calm voice, and not in a locked room in tones too low to make out. That single habit of narrating the why may be the most valuable financial and emotional gift I give my son, and it costs nothing but my willingness to be transparent about how I think. Now I want to return to that night in the kitchen, the one I opened with, because I left us both standing there, and I owe you what happened next. When my son asked how much money we had, and I gave him a real number, I watched him do the thing children do, which is to reach for a comparison he could actually understand. "Is that a lot?" he asked. And I felt the old inherited script rise up in me, the one that wanted to either reassure him falsely that we had plenty and he need never think about it, or warn him gravely that we did not have enough, and he should worry the way I had worried. Both of those were my mother's ghost speaking, the two poles of the silence I was raised in, and I recognized them and I did not obey them. Instead, I said something I had never once heard as a child. I said, "It's enough for what we need, and we're careful with it, and that's a good place to be." And then I did the part that mattered even more than the words. I let the subject be ordinary. I did not lower my voice. I did not change the temperature of the room. I did not signal to him in 100 wordless ways that he had wandered into forbidden territory and should back away. I let his question be a normal question that got a normal answer, and then I asked him if he wanted to help me make dinner, and the money conversation ended not with a slammed door, but with a shrug, the way a conversation about anything unremarkable ends. And I want you to understand that this shrug, this beautiful, ordinary shrug, was the whole victory. Because a subject that ends in a shrug is a subject that has lost its power to haunt. There is a deeper current under all of this that I don't want to leave unspoken, because it's the real reason money carries so much more charge than a stack of paper and metal ever should. Money, in almost every family, is never only money. It is the physical stand-in for love, for safety, for worth, for time, for all the things we cannot hold in our hands. When a parent works themselves to exhaustion and comes home with nothing left to give but the money that work produced, the money silently becomes the love and the child feels the substitution even if no one can name it. When a family measures its own value by comparison to the neighbor's, money quietly becomes worth, and a child raised in that current learns to price himself. When our own parents used money as the only language they had for care, because they were never given any other, we grow up with the two things fused so completely that we cannot feel our own value without checking our own balance, which is a devastating way to move through a life. And so when I talk to my son about money in a calm, honest, unashamed voice, I am really trying to do something underneath the money itself. I am trying to keep it from fusing with his sense of being loved. I am trying to make sure that in his body, money stays money, and love stays love, and the two never become the tangled, sorrowful knot that so many of us have spent our adult lives trying to pick apart. That, in the end, is why a subject that looks so practical is actually one of the most intimate things a family ever navigates. To talk about money well with a child is not really to prepare them for the economy. It is to hand them a self that is not secretly at war with its own worth, a nervous system that does not flood with shame at the arrival of a bill, a relationship to having and wanting and choosing that is clear-eyed and calm rather than haunted. It is to give them the literacy we were denied and to withhold the dread we were handed, to pass down the competence and quietly compost the fear so it does not travel one more generation. My mother could not give me this because no one gave it to her, and I have stopped being angry about that because I understand now that she was passing on exactly what was passed to her, faithfully, the way we all do until someone somewhere decides to feel the whole weight of the inheritance and consciously set part of it down. I get to be that someone in my line, and so do you, in yours. That is not a small thing. It might be one of the largest things a parent ever does, and almost no one will ever see you do it, because it happens in kitchens, in ordinary voices, in the deliberate calm you bring to a child's simple question on a completely unremarkable night. If this video shifted something in the way you see money and the silent things we hand our children, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more on how the world's wisest cultures quietly build calmer, steadier, more whole human beings, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. See you in the next one.